Uh, well, we continue tonight on the E100 plan, which there's nothing magical about it, but it helps us see the key points or markers as we go through the Bible and study and read. And I think about if you were a new convert, these would be probably 100 good sections to read. I think if you were maybe a veteran like a lot of us in reading God's word, it is good to go back and see God's work and God's history, God's working, God's plan to bring about certain things. And as we looked at last week, Jacob and Esau had their like kids do sometimes, and certainly there was a cultural pressure there and tradition and family issues and all of that ended up through their competing, or maybe maybe it was the dysfunctional family that they had kind of done some things that caused a lot of rivalry and just broken heart and all of that. And tonight we come to a section out of Genesis. We skip to chapter 32. We're going to start at verse 22. Stan's going to read it 22 and go through the end of 33. And this is kind of a reconciliation time. So I think we can probably learn some skills and how to get along with one another. So Stan, if you are ready, we are ready for Genesis chapter 32, verse 22, or beginning there.
32, 22.
That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. And then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him, and he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. And Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." And then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. And Esau asked, "What do you mean by all these droves I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I have already plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob, "if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift for me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, "Let me be on our way. I'll accompany you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are tender and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I move along slowly at the pace of the droves before me and that of the children. until I come to my Lord in Seir. And Esau said, then let me leave some of my men with you. But why do that? Jacob asked. Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he brought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar and called it Eloho Israel.
All right. Thank you very much. I guess that little phrase there at the end means God of Israel, or mighty is the God of Israel.
Mine says God. The God.
El is kind of the word for God, and then however they add that on, different kind of endings kind of describe the name of God or aspects of God. So, all right, couple of things we want to talk about. What do we learn about God, and maybe even more so people in this section. But we do see that Jacob wrestles with God or an angel, or trying to remember exactly how it's phrased, but he wrestles with God, and God changes his name, which is an interesting thing. But anyway, what stands out to you guys? What do we learn about God or people? Okay.
I
Well,
think
let's think
Jacob,
about it a little bit. Okay, Ken.
with this situation, Jacob has a history of trying to manipulate the circumstances to his betterment, or what he considers it. So here he is struggling with God, and I think perhaps God or his angel or whoever it was allowed himself to struggle and fight and wrestle with Jacob, because Jacob has to learn that he's fighting God and all that he's doing, and he needs to amend his ways and to quit striving with God. It's something he had learned from his parents, and he essentially teaches his children that. And if it is not for one child who really embraced God and really through him provided great salvation for that family, Jacob would be what I would call a failure.
Yeah. You know, wrestling with God, the concept of God, sometimes even in trying to convert people, you can tell they're wrestling with God, wrestling within themselves. And we have to get on the right page with God in order to be successful. So sometimes it's very much a challenge, and our relationship with other people affects our relationship to God. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be bad, helpful or detrimental. So it does seem like after Jacob has done this, as we get into chapter 33, that he is resolved to do the right thing, at least try to work on that relationship. Well, he's willing to sacrifice and make something good happen. So I think that's important. Kind of interesting for the Bible to say, therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So seems like a lasting impact for generations on that. Anything else stand out to you guys? Phil, are there any key things that you see in this passage?
There's kind of an interesting thing on Have I got unmuted yet? There we go.
Yep, yeah.
There's kind of an interesting progression here. In verse 24, it says that Jacob wrestled with a man. In Hosea 12 and verse 4, it talks about how he wrestled with an angel. And in verse 28, he was contending with God. And that's reaffirmed in verse 30 when he says, I have seen God face to face, which I think is so interesting that first it's a man, then it's an angel, and then it's God. And so this may have been a time in which God appeared as a man. Sometimes the phrase angel of the Lord is spoken of as men. And this is an interesting occasion. I don't know of any that's quite like it.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, I was using the literal word app today, and I think it'll say messengers up at the top, and the same Hebrew word for angel, or well, Greek, it's the same word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that true in Hebrew?
It is in Hebrew too. The word malach, from which Malachi, or Malachi actually, which means my messenger, but malach is a messenger, which is an angel. That's the word for angel, and the word for messenger as well, just like angelos in the New Testament.
Okay. I know nothing about Hebrew, that's for sure. But that little app is a great app for things like that. All right. I'm trying to think what else here. But one of the interesting concepts about this is that there seemed to be that both of them wanted to be reconciled and get together. I don't know if God impressed that on them or what, or whether time passed or whatever, but they reframed their thinking and had a positive attitude about it. They had an attitude of, I'm willing to sacrifice to make something good come out of this and do my part. And they ended up thinking about each other and looking out for each other and blessing one another, and God blessed that relationship as well. And again, that idea of changing Jacob's name to Israel, I don't remember exactly what their names mean before that. There's probably a footnote, but Israel means struggles with God.
Jacob meant heel grabber, the one who grabbed, referring to when he grabbed the heel of Esau, heel grabber. At least that's what Hugo McCord used to call it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's what I've always heard too. So he was born after Esau, but Jacob got the blessing, or the whatever. Anything else stand out there? If not, we're going to go to Luke 15 in the New Testament.
Ben, do you think it's significant that Jacob, maybe he didn't still trust Esau that much because he didn't really meet up with him where he said he was going? And he seemed a little hesitant to leave anybody. I don't know. It just seems like there's a little undertone of is this too good to be true?
Good, great question. I don't know the answer to that. I can certainly understand where he would feel that way, though. Anybody else have any wisdom on that one?
Well, the way he positioned all of his herds and maid servants and men servants and wives and so forth, he put Rachel and Joseph at the very back. It appears if he thought if something were to happen, I want them to be the safest, and that's seems like what he might have done. But he appears to have been very cautious in the meeting.
Right.
And he sent a great gift ahead of him just to sort of grease the skids.
Yeah.
In Genesis 32:3, it's called the Land of Seer, which might not be a specific city or place, but rather and then it's called the country of Edom. So Succoth may have been, I don't know that it was there, but we need to think of that as a larger area rather than a city.
Very good. All right. Well, reconciliation. We are ministers of reconciliation, or we are ambassadors. God wants us to help people get together in unity to serve Him. So it takes sacrifice on our part. We have to prepare people's hearts before we can have success in that way. And prayer is an important part of that. But reconciliation is a part of God's work, and we want to cooperate with Him in order to be reconciled around God's truth and God's plan and God's love.
In summary, as we reflect on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we talk about true reconciliation. We realize that sometimes guilt motivates people to do bad things, like lying or covering up the truth with a new crime. Here's an example of guilt motivating someone to do a good thing. Jacob obviously had a guilty conscience. Years earlier, he had deceived his brother Esau and stolen both his birthright and blessing. Now Jacob's guilt causes him to take steps to be reconciled with his brother. But it was really reconciliation, but was it really reconciliation that Jacob was after? Probably not. Jacob was just hoping to save his own skin by flattering and paying off his brother, and even his prayer life had a guilty ring, if you read chapter 32, verse 11. True reconciliation involves a change of heart first, and then a change of actions. Sometimes it takes a long time for God to change our hearts, mostly because it's so difficult for us to admit our sin. But until we do, we substitute rationalizing for true reconciliation and remain trapped by our guilt and sin. Ironically, it's Esau who exhibited true reconciliation. Years earlier, he was a driven man bent on getting even. Now he is a contented man who holds no grudges and is willing to genuinely embrace his nervous brother. Esau is an Old Testament example of a loving father in the parable of Jesus told many years later in Luke chapter 15 that we'll look at in our lesson 60. The point is, God can reconcile our most broken relationships, but we must let Him do it His way. We must be willing to change. Sometimes life can make us so guilty, bitter, or angry that the only thing that can change our hearts is a genuine experience of God. That's what happened to Jacob. And if there are difficult relationships and situations in your life right now, maybe you need to stop asking God to change the circumstances. Instead, pray that God would help you understand and accept how He's trying to use those circumstances to change you. You think about that.